In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of Andrew. Yes, seven, Jerry. Episode 7 of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. I am Andrew Langer.
I'm Jerry Rogers.
And we are titling this what, Jerry? Andrew and Jerry Save Policing? Save Public Safety? What do you think? Save law enforcement?
Andrew and Jerry Save the Streets.
Andrew and Jerry Save the Streets. I love it. That's a brilliant way to put it. Because we're going to be talking about policing. We're going to be talking about crime. We're also going to be talking about criminal justice reform. We're going to be joined by David Safavian, who's the general counsel of the American Conservative Union. Also going to be talking to him about CPAC, which starts up later this month. But in the meantime,
it's February.
It is. Hey, rabbit.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
It's also, it's St. Bridget's Day.
Is that right?
And
this is why you put up that lovely post on Facebook.
Yes, because I have a Bridget. My oldest is Bridget Ann Rogers, and we have the St. Bridget's cross up. We got the Irish flag out to the shamrocks. My wife wants to jump to the wifey is very exact with holidays. So the next holiday in the Rogers household is Groundhog's Day.
Of course.
And we do a big thing in the morning, and Erica makes special food, and the kids come down, we watch the groundhog. And then of course it's my wedding anniversary, which is a big deal in February. Also, it's Ronald Reagan's birthday, same day as my anniversary.
Which is what? What is your anniversary?
February 6th.
Oh, so it really is coming up. So the anniversary of when my wife and I started dating is this month. As it happens, it's also my dad's birthday.
Wow.
So we will celebrate that. That's right after Valentine's Day.
And there's Valentine's Day.
But let me ask you this, Jerry. Who was Saint Bridget, and what is she the patron saint of?
Well, I mean, she is a patron saint along with Saint Patrick of Ireland. Number one. Number two, she was an acolyte of Saint Patrick. She was a peasant girl, right? Who was the daughter of a Druid king or Druid chieftain.
Wow.
And became a Christian. And the story is that she took the ground covering and wove it into a cross, and it's the St. Bridget's cross. And so and in fact Ireland is moving to give her greater recognition. And of course, also there's the great warrior Bridget in Irish history, the great warrior princess Bridget. And so it's interesting that, for those who know Irish history, there's the history of the Druids and the great Irish kings and this sort of thing. And Bridget means something very special to both that tradition, but also to the Christian Catholic tradition.
Well, I'm pulling it up, Jerry. This is the St. Bridget's cross.
Yes.
And let me just share that. I don't need to share sound. So that's the St. Bridget's cross. That is a beautiful icon right there.
It is indeed. In fact, how we decided to name Bridget was Erica and I were in Old Town Alexandria in an Irish shop that used to be down there.
Oh yes, I know it well.
Yeah, and we're walking in there, and it was just a St. Bridget's cross, and we read the tale or the story of St. Bridget, and we decided in that shop, if we have a girl, we'll name her Bridget. And sure enough, we had a girl, and there you go. Now we've had three other girls after her and a boy, so it just so happens today St. Bridget. And also, this is personal nonsense, but Bridget herself is coming home from Catholic University today, and we're going to go to Bushwaller's Irish pub, and we're going to have a little St. Bridget's Day celebration.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, I'll tell you something. I don't want to get too into detail. Don't want to divulge details of your daughter's life, but on our way visiting a college last week and sort of talking about this particular opportunity that could present itself for one of my kids, we talked about what's going on with your daughter and the interesting things, the opportunities that are abounding in her life. So I just want to let you know. So, towards the end of the show, by the way, folks, I am going to talk to Jerry about a movie that he recommended. In fact, because it spurs two things. Yes, The Tender Bar. I want to talk about that towards the end of the show. Also want to talk about a movie that I started watching, The Eyes of Tammy Faye.
Oh, no.
No. Let me tell you something. We're about a third of the way in. You know, it was just one of those things that. What? Go ahead.
What an icky time in terms of evangelical Christianity with the Bakers and the Jimmy Swaggart fall from grace,
sure, yes,
and all the rest of it. It's just. Oh,
let me tell you why I was surprised. Now I have a weird connection to this movie. I'll say it now. In that the guy who plays Pat Robertson, Gabriel Olds, is someone that I went to high school with, that I acted in at least one play with. We're still friendly with each other. He plays Pat Robertson, which is interesting. But they, the movie itself paints a very sympathetic portral of Tammy Faye. Yeah. I mean, we haven't gotten into Jim yet. But, listen, I mean, here's the thing. It's funny because maybe we'll get into this later. What seems to be forgotten in most of these portrayals, in any of this, and sort of the glee that the left takes whenever somebody in a religious community, especially a Christian community, has a major fall from grace, is forgetting that we're all imperfect.
Right.
There's a lot of this discussion over Jerry Falwell Jr., for instance. And there's another prominent minister took aim squarely at him.
It's funny. David French has a piece at The Atlantic right now. And again, David French, God bless him. But David French has this gig now with Time and Time Magazine. And therefore, he's making it a business to go after Christians in particular, conservatives more broadly. And here's the thing. For every one pastor or for every one televangelist that has fallen from grace, I can give you 100 pastors and missionaries and volunteers and other people of faith who behind the scenes are working, advancing God's kingdom. So I think it's unfair that there's so much to criticize in terms of the culture of our corporate culture, of the media. And who does David French decide to go after? His own. And I have a problem with that.
Isn't that interesting, right? Because we've talked about the grift, and we've talked about people who sort of set up these I'm going to say it, a money-making scheme for themselves, a sinecure almost, where sort of they're essentially, they become an industry of whatever someone is willing to pay them to tear at something else, and how it just winds through a movement. And again, now this is something that can happen on both the left and the right. Right. We've talked about how the Tea Party movement was destroyed from without, right, by the constant attacks on the part of the Obama administration, on the part of journalists. But then it was also destroyed from within by grifters who were able to seize on it and use it for their own money-making ends. Black Lives Matter, that movement is certainly seeing that right now with the discussion over the one of the leaders of it having multiple houses and
but anyway. The difference I think between the left and the right keeps on waiting, and there are glimpses of it where they say, look, because of wokeness, political correctness, the left eats its own. I don't believe that. I think that happens on occasion. The left, if you look at its history, its success, it is remarkably disciplined, remarkably loyal. It is the right that continually eats its own.
I think if we're looking at this from a sociological perspective, that, it is more difficult in a movement of rugged individualists when a leader who is able to capture that, and I mean that in a good way, is able to capture that energy and get everybody moving in the direction. When a leader like that falls, the movement has a hard time recovering. I think it is easier for a movement where people are subsuming their individual interests to the collective. When one strong man falls, another one can easily step in and take their place because there are more lemmings. Anyway,
but
this is
yeah, I know.
Go ahead. This is not where I wanted to
Although it's not going into safe streets, but it does go into. I know you wanted to talk about this, but are the guests that we had on a previous podcast.
I'm out for a second because I want to talk about two things in that regard. So let's actually move into our ripped from the headlines segment.
Ripped from the headlines.
So go ahead, because this does open it up. I know you want to talk about Ilya. I want to talk about Ilya.
Well, Ilya Shapiro was on the program, and just the day after, or a couple of days after, it was announced that he was going to take this leadership position at Georgetown Law.
Oh yeah,
and then a couple of days after that, it broke that Justice Breyer was retiring, and Joe Biden pulled a Joe Biden, and instead of being artful, instead of being smart, it just was political and ugly, and said that I will only nominate an African-American woman for the court. And again, detractors and Democrats, Senator Durbin and others, defended the president by saying Reagan did this and Trump did this. They did not, by the way. Yes. And again, it just shows you how intellectually lazy our media is, because it just accepts that as truth. It's not the truth. And then, of course, Ilya Shapiro was critical, rightly so, of the president's fetish, an ugly focus on race, and said more or less that we'll get a lesser justice because of the preoccupation and focus on race. And then, of course, he was criticized. He was criticized by his future colleagues, his pending colleagues at Georgetown Law. And he issued an apology.
Yes.
And I thought the apology was unnecessary.
I agree.
And now it turns out he gave a statement yesterday. It was on Twitter. You can look at it. Maybe we'll put up on the show page later, where he more or less says, "Look, I did nothing wrong. I am already on administrative leave, pending an investigation." So they're investigating him, which I think is like, to what end, and what are they investigating?
This is the point. I talked to our old colleague Stacey Lynn, who's now with, I think, CBS News CBS Radio, and that's the problem, of course, right? Our conversation with David, our conversation with Ilya Shapiro was about the politicization of the High Court and the politicization of the nominating process. And Ilya is a thoughtful scholar. He thinks deeply about issues. He writes about them, issues about the Constitution. And more to the point, he thinks about them in a way that, and from a perspective that young people, young law students need to be hearing from. And so, which is why, incidentally, Georgetown hired him in the first place. Let's be real and honest here, right? Georgetown, if they were like any other employer in 2022, they would have and should have been looking at everything that Ilya Shapiro had written. I'm sure they should have been looking at his social media, right? He just waged a school board campaign. He ran for school board in Fairfax County. I would hope that they would be looking at what he said on the campaign trail. Now, I would hope that nothing that he would do would cause them to not want to hire him. But nevertheless, right, you can't come in now after you've offered the job to somebody and after he's had the incident, he's offered his apology.
But again, you say the incident. What he did, what he tweeted, there was nothing wrong with it.
Well, Jerry, when I say incident, I mean,
no, I know.
Okay. Maybe it was inartful on my part.
No. I'm just saying that. No, you're forced to. There's no other way to describe it but the incident, because the mainstream culture and the elites have made it into an incident.
But yes, they've made it into an incident. That's my point, is that the incident really is the reaction to Ilya Shapiro's tweet than the tweet itself. And weirdly enough, my tweet defending, we did this thing when we had our conversation. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about before we get to David Safavian and as we tee up the topic. My tweet in defense of Ilya Shapiro, that got 20,000 impressions, right? I pulled that up, the disparate things. It's like the only political tweet. Yes. And that's, but it was, that tweet got the impressions because somebody from the National Review was kind enough to retweet me without my asking. But that's the other thing I wanted to talk about, Jerry, because we've got this thing with Ilya Shapiro going on. We had our conversation with Eugene Volokh last week about free speech. And Friday, I'm coming back to, we came back from our day trip. Weirdly enough, I turn on the Bill Maher show. I never watched Bill Maher. And I turned it on because our friend Matt Welch from Reason was going to be on there. And they were interviewing Ira Glasser, who's the former executive director of the ACLU. And he is talking about how disappointed he is with this complete change in approach from the ACLU.
Sure.
That the ACLU is now applying a means test. They're now policing the language of the people whose speech they're supposed to be defending, right, which is a complete betrayal of what the ACLU was founded on. And he was talking about how disgusted he is with this. At the same time this is happening, there is a debate going on regarding the platform Substack. And I'm gonna throw you under the bus here. Jerry called me up the other day and he's like, "Hey, explain Substack to me." And we've got to talking about Substack as a platform for speech. And so the communications director for Substack is on social media being attacked for Substack being a platform for speech. And I turned to my wife and I said, we're living in really scary times. And I don't mean that hyperbolically. I've said some things that are hyperbole in the last couple of days. Because, hold on. Let me just finish my thought, Jerry. We're at a point, and this is a real inflection point, where we are raising young people to not have any kind of respect or regard for free speech or why free speech is important.
And again, to go back to what Eugene Volokh said, and that is, we understand the distinction between the government's role in prohibiting speech, but what he said was there's also this idea of the principle or the spirit of free speech.
Yes.
And that is certainly being destroyed. There's no other way to say it. And I'll throw this out, and we've talked about this before, but it seems to me, look, this has always been an issue. Like there's been speech codes, right back in the 80s, there was the Tipper Gore movement to put warning labels on records. And then later in the 90s and later 90s, early 2000s, there were speech codes on college campuses. And that evolved into wokeism. And then COVID hit. And COVID, in a relatively short period of time, has brought the Chinese cultural revolution type public square, public discussion to America.
Yes,
we are entering into a phase of American history where most people are afraid. Look, I've been talking about mask policy on the radio show and with you. I've written about it.
Absolutely.
Cloth masks, sponge masks have zero effect.
Let's be really clear. There are studies that indicate that there is an efficacy there are serious questions as to the efficacy of masks.
Yes.
Jerry is saying this, and Jerry is the editor of Real Clear Health, so right. He understands this. He does this research.
And I just spoke with the head of a big organization, and he told me, I just had this conversation yesterday. He said, there's nothing I can do. I know you're right, Jerry, but because if I say something or change the policy, I run the risk of being run out of here.
Yes.
So again, free leaders, those who should be leading us, are afraid to speak the truth.
And more to the point, as we seed more of these grounds for discussion, away from traditional public squares onto quasi-private, quasi-public platforms that are corporate controlled, right? Again, going back to 2001 me, CEI employee me, talking about the problems of, if you had told me then that I was going to be talking 20 years later about the problems of privatized speech platforms, I would have been incredulous. I don't know, whatever, however you want to put it. Jerry, listen, we got to tee this up. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about speech later on. But we had you were, again, like you always are, on the leading edge of this. There were some tragic attacks or there was a tragic, I'm going to say, incident involving police in New York a little over a week ago, late last week, where there were the funerals. This is part of the reason why we want to talk about these issues today. Talk about what happened in New York.
Well, again, a 22-year-old rookie, a 27-year-old cop on the job for just 3 years, and a third rookie officer go to a domestic call. And I'll say this, and I've talked to police, I've interviewed police on the radio program. The fact is that because of the political the political side of things, police tools have been taken out of their tool belt, and they go into these circumstances and they have to be less aggressive. They have to be careful, and that being careful actually puts their lives in jeopardy. And what happened up in New York, of course, was they went to a back bedroom. A guy comes out shooting and murders 2 officers.
Yes, and a guy who should not, by any rights, should not have had a firearm. Right? It was
shouldn't have had a firearm. Shouldn't have been in New York because he was on parole in Maryland. And so the entire system broke down. But this is the system now where, look, we'll talk about this with our guest, but New York City in Midtown Manhattan, retail shops are closing because of shoplifting. So the rule of law is out the window.
I just read the story, the Dwayne Reed that was across up the block across the street from the office that I used to work for.
Yeah, in Midtown.
They're close. I mean, we're talking 50th Street and 8th Avenue.
That's exactly right.
Which listen, yes, 30 years ago, 50th Street and 8th Avenue was not a place you would have opened a Dwayne Reed, but it is a Tony neighborhood now, or at least it was. That's astounding to me.
Look, right, our backyard is Baltimore City. In the first 30 days of the year, there have been 36 homicides.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, again, things are out of control. And
but Gary, listen, I know you are nothing but a staunch defender of Marilyn Mosby. You believe in everything that she has done.
Yes, progressive prosecutors. In fact, if you can't do this, but for the sake of conversation, if you were to lay the blame on one person or type of person that has brought in the crime surge and violent crime surge, it's these progressive prosecutors.
Well, and we're going to talk with our guest, David Safavian, about this. In fact, Jerry, why don't we go ahead and tee that up, and let's go directly to our expert advice segment.
Expert advice.
Welcome to our expert advice segment. We're really excited to be joined by our guest today. He's been a good friend to both me and Jerry in the policy world for years, both in his guise as general counsel of the American Conservative Union and before. His name is David Safavian. David, welcome to Andrew and Jerry Save the World.
Oh, fellas, thank you for having me on this morning.
So we started talking about this. We had this tragic case of these police officers being gunned down a couple of weeks ago in New York. Jerry and I talk a great deal and have talked a great deal about crime in Baltimore. A lot of your work, I mean, obviously your work with the American Conservative Union, you talk a lot about criminal justice reform, and we'll talk about this, but let's talk about the balance between the two. Let's start here. What do progressives get wrong about criminal justice reform, and how does that play into the crime surges that we see?
So it's a great question, and it's one that I think a lot of our policymaker friends struggle with. But here's the bottom line: The difference between where conservatives come and liberals or progressives come is this. From a conservative standpoint, we always start bottom line with public safety. Anything that we do on policy has to make public safety better, has to strengthen communities, has to make officers safer, families safer, businesses safer. Our friends on the left don't start with public safety. They start with a term that we all love and know called equity.
Yeah.
What is equitable? What is fair? And when they do that, they are completely disregarding the fact that there has to be a role for law enforcement. There has to be a role for prisons because, let's be candid, there are people that are just too dangerous to be on the streets. So when they talk about abolishing prisons and defunding police, they are completely ignoring the fact that prisons and police are important to our public safety strategy. We believe that they are a critical element, but at the same time, we have to find a balance, because for every dollar that we spend to unnecessarily incarcerate people because they're not public safety threats, that's a dollar that comes out of more cops on the street, better salary for cops, more effective criminal justice strategies. So we find that balance, whereas they are often a whole different land with a whole different set of goals.
And these are vital issues. I mean, it's one of those things where we've been talking about speech, and literally just a couple of minutes ago, I had said that we're raising a generation and successive generations of people, of kids who have no respect or understanding of why speech is important. Do you think we're doing the same thing when it comes to policing as we inject all of this equity propaganda into our schools?
Oh, I think that there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
If the only difference between prosecution and non-prosecution of someone who poses a threat to a family or a neighborhood is the color of their skin or their gender, we are by definition leaving open the possibility that some people are allowed to be on the streets even though they're dangerous, merely because they check certain boxes for our progressive friends. That doesn't work.
Well, and again, we're in this age where the left, the progressives, but also mainstream elites, corporate media, and the rest like to say, follow the science. So when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to policing and crime reduction, if we follow the science, a couple of things. Number one, we know that good aggressive policing actually protects against mass incarceration. We know that at the height of successful fixing broken windows policing in New York City, we know that arrests actually came down as the homicide rate and shootings and other violent crime came down. And also, lastly, we know from Heather McDonald at the City Journal and other experts that this idea that police departments are systemically racist is untrue. In fact, if you look at the data, it's clear that systemic racism doesn't exist in police departments. That doesn't mean there's an exception that proves the rule. It just means that our friends on the left, and I like that you say that, but also those who are more mainstream are misinterpreting the data.
Yeah, I think my challenge, and we do work with some folks on the left who share our vision of public safety. My challenge is that they only like the data that supports their position.
Yes. Well, I'm that way too sometimes.
Let's be frank. I mean, come on, that's part of human nature, and I get it, and we're all in on the joke.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I think where there's a major disconnect is there is a difference between incarceration and accountability, right? I think that incarceration is one facet of accountability, but we all have to be held accountable for our actions. And I think that's where progressives kind of lose the mark. They lose the bead on target, is their solution results in people not being held accountable.
Right.
And it's that accountability that if we hold people accountable for the small things in the beginning, then they don't progress to the worst things later on.
if I had our bell, Andrew, I would
Yes.
be banging it right now because David, what you said makes perfect sense. And let me put it into a bigger, a wider context, and you can comment. And that is my criticism of the Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney in Baltimore, or the prosecutors in Manhattan or Philadelphia or LA, is that they believe that quality of life crimes, or what they call low impact crimes, that you don't need to police or hold people accountable. And I understand from where they're coming. There's been, in our history, police abuses and these sorts of things. But the fact of the matter is, you're right. And this is the basis of fixing broken windows policing, right? You go into a community and you negotiate with the community the policing strategies and the community involvement. But everyone agrees. You go into East Baltimore and they'll tell you that we have to hold these petty criminals accountable.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're lacking, David. We're lacking accountability.
Yeah. Rogers, you're so much smarter than lying around.
Well, certainly on these issues,
I used to be better looking, but I kind of lost.
I want to show this.
COVID.
By the way, Jerry mentioned Heather McDonald's book. That she's written a number of books.
Yeah, the War on the Police,
the War on Cops.
War on Cops.
I have this here. I'm pulling this up here. This is really interesting because, David, we've been talking about speech. We've been talking about conversations, the importance of conversations. This is a picture from the Henry Miller Library, which is a nonprofit private entity in Big Sur in California. And they have this tree of knowledge. And here you would expect, because it's Big Sur and it's the Henry Miller Library, it would be nothing but progressive books. And yet to their credit, they have up for sale on the tree of knowledge, Heather McDonald's The War on Cops. So, kudos to the Henry Miller Library for that. Let me ask you this, David, from a general perspective, because you are the general counsel of the American Conservative Union, which has, especially in the last, I would say 6, 7, 8 years, really so I'll go back a little bit, probably a little bit further as well. But especially with, and we're going to get into CPAC in a bit, definitely focusing on policy and getting into the weeds is not the right word, grassroots certainly, but understanding that policy is hard, and that these policy questions are hard questions, and that there are no easy solutions. That's part of the problem again that our friends and neighbors on the left have, is they want simple solutions to things. Talk about this idea of the fact that there are no simple solutions, and talk about what ACU has been doing in that regard.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. Policy is hard, and criminal justice policy is particularly hard for a couple of reasons. One is human nature is impossible to predict, and we can predict kind of mass trends, but so every time we do a sound evidence-based reform, there's always a possibility that some reprobate is going to do something really awful, right? And the problem with policy and politics is that bad laws are often founded by bad headlines. So you'll have a 99% success rate on a criminal justice reform, but one guy or one gal is going to get out and do something really awful, and there's a group that wants to throw the entire regime out. We're seeing that right now after Waukesha, right? Waukesha, the system failed. The guy should never have been released on the street. He should have been held without bail. He was a public safety threat. He was a risk of absconding. And yet some progressive prosecutor decided, you know what, $1,000 is enough. He paid the $1,000, got into his SUV and drove over and killed 6 people. That is not the right way to go. But here's the other problem, and it's not just to a problem for our friends on the left. The simple solution, if you think about it from Heather McDonald, who, she and I disagree on a whole lot of stuff, is, we should just incarcerate more people. Tom Cotton goes out and he says, we don't have an over-incarceration problem, we got an under-incarceration problem. Well, guess what? That doesn't work either. If we're going to hold every single person and hold them to guarantee that they will never reoffend again. That means every minor crime is a life sentence, and
Yes.
nobody wants that.
The idea of zero tolerance, we saw how it didn't work in
Absolutely.
Baltimore City under Mayor O'Malley, and you make a great point here because of O'Malley's mass incarceration, his mass arrest policy, he bastardized fixing broken windows policing. Fixing broken windows policing is not mass incarceration. It's not even mass arrests. It's data-driven, community negotiated policing, which is different in New York than Philadelphia, than Boston, than Camden. And so, however, the O'Malley bad policy has really hurt the public discussion on policing and criminal justice.
Well, and let me take it one level further, because I think people are kind of locked into stereotypes, and they assume that, the African-American community in New York didn't like broken windows, right? I would challenge anybody to go talk to the average African-American mother or father living in Brooklyn or the Bronx and ask them if they want people out there tagging with spray paint. They want people out there doing shoplifting that drive stores out of there. It's no wonder that we have these kind of retail deserts, because all the shoplifting means if you're Walgreens or CVS or, none of the companies want to put places up. And next thing you know, there's no place to buy fresh food and vegetables.
Yep.
So all of these small things, maybe our friends on the progressive left think that, African Americans, people of color, don't want any law enforcement. I think that is as far from the truth as it gets. What they want is proportional law enforcement. They want accountability to stop people from doing the small things, because it affects their quality of life just as much as it affects yours, Jerry, or yours, Andrew.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And again, you mentioned, David, you mentioned the term equity earlier. And the problem with the term is that it's defined by the person using it. There is no definition. I believe in equality. I believe in dealing with disparities in criminal justice. We have to do that, right? But equity to some really is about it's about politics. It's about fighting old fights. It's about getting the outcome that I want, as opposed to what's the best outcome for the community.
Equity is about as well defined as the term fair or the term good, right? It's nothing but a political Rorschach test.
Yep, that's right.
I pull this up here. This is the graphic that I was shown about this, about equity, and I always come back to this idea. How come the guy over here? Sorry, for those of you who are listening, it's the graphic of three people standing at a fence. Someone very tall, someone of middling height, and someone very short, and they're peering over the fence watching a baseball game. And I'm thinking, well, how come they didn't just buy a ticket to the baseball game? If they bought a ticket to the baseball game, all three of them could actually sit and watch the game together. Why is it that I'm somehow responsible for them watching this game with the apple carts? Anyway, David, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about generally, and I should pull this up. Generally, the work that ACU does. I'm going to share the screen right now so everybody can see. This is the ACU page, conservative.org. Obviously, lots of stuff on CPAC. You guys don't just do CPAC, and you don't just do criminal justice, which is, I know, the work that you do when you're not just the general counsel. But talk about the things that the American Conservative Union does and the ACU Foundation does, if you're allowed to talk about what the ACU Foundation does.
I can, because I wear two hats. I'm also the general counsel of the ACU Foundation.
There you go.
Well, let me start with who we are.
Yeah. Because
I don't think a lot of people understand. ACU was founded in 1964 by a guy named William Buckley, right? And the idea was that we need to paint with bold, broad, bright colors, not kind of subtle mishmash, mealy-mouthed policies. We need to, stand up for conservative ideas, conservative beliefs, and that means, respect for life, reduced government intervention in the marketplace, responsible ways to spend your dollars and my dollars. That's kind of our core set of core principles, right? That the government doesn't know best. You know best, and I know best. Not only what's best for our businesses, but ourselves and our children. How do we implement that? How do we pursue those things? Well, the first thing we do is we educate our activists, and that's what CPAC is all about. CPAC is not a political rally. It is a way for people to come and learn about what is conservatism, what are conservative principles. So if you go to a CPAC or you watch it online, or you watch it on C-SPAN, you're going to see a range of people talking about different conservative views, everything from foreign policy to the economy to criminal justice reform, to education policy. We talk about all these things in very, very granular levels. It's not boring by any stretch, especially when our President Donald Trump comes on stage. But you know, we really do go out of our way and make it a point to educate folks, because that's the most critical tool for us. But another thing that we do is we hold legislators accountable, and it's probably the least reported but most impactful thing that we do at ACU. We have a team right next door that looks at every single piece of legislation that is voted on by every single legislative chamber in the country.
Oh, wow.
So there are 99 legislative chambers at the states, plus the House and the Senate in Washington, D.C. And yep, our ACU ratings.
Yes,
and they look at those and they pull out votes that really define what it means to be conservative. So votes on tax cuts, votes on abortion, votes on education in charter schools and private schools. They then, for every state and for the legislature, they combine all those votes and they give every elected official at the legislative level a rating. The reason why this is so important is that we know in this era of social media and mass media that people like to talk conservative or they like to talk liberal, but sometimes their voting records don't reflect that. In an era where so many legislative districts are really gerrymandered, where the rubber meets the road is how conservative or how liberal a candidate is. So what we provide for voters, for everybody really, is a way to look at candidates and go, who's the most conservative? Who do I want to vote for? And if somebody has a 50% ACU rating, well, what that tells me is they may talk conservative, but they vote liberal. This is the most important thing, to hold our elected officials accountable. And I really urge everybody to go to ratings.conservative.org because they can. Yep.
No, sorry. I pulled up, David. I pulled up my old hometown, Hartsdale, New York, and you can sort it by lifetime ratings. So the highest was Senator James Buckley, who was in office years and years ago. Interestingly enough, Al D'Amato, only a 67% lifetime rating. Yep. But then you get down here and you see, where was she? Hillary Clinton, 8% rating. Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, a 7% rating. Elliot Engel, a 6% rating. Schumer, 5%.
Look at Moynihan.
Yeah, Moynihan was an 8% rating.
Yeah. Good guy, though. God rest his soul.
Yeah, but Jerry and I were talking about the late Senator Moynihan and about these issues, right? The thing about Moynihan, and David, I don't know how familiar you are with Daniel Patrick Moynihan, but he was someone who thought deeply about policy, and certainly someone who understood that when you have this approach to crime and policing and the socioeconomic issues that are plaguing inner cities, there are lots of factors that are involved, right?
Oh, and Moynihan was famous for questioning the wisdom of the social safety net.
Sure.
Yes.
Right? I mean, his view was that once you get people hooked on government, they never want to wean themselves off, and it undermines an entire generation and an entire socioeconomic class of people. This is why, after spending trillions of dollars following Great Society, we've seen poverty rates shift not a bit. Yeah. Despite all the free handouts.
It really was.
And what's sad there too is that, Andrew, just on Senator Moynihan, he was a liberal's liberal. However, he was someone you could work with. And I'll give you an example. When I was at the Manhattan Institute, we had a reentry program that we worked on, men coming out of prison, getting them engaged in culture, society, jobs, and that sort of thing. And we were working with, at the time, the mayor of Newark, Cory Booker. And Cory Booker at that time was a Democrat, was a liberal, but wanted to find solutions to criminal justice reform and some other issues. Moynihan was that way, but it seems something happened. Maybe it's the continued gerrymandering, but there are fewer and fewer friends on the left, like a Moynihan, like an old Cory Booker, years ago Cory Booker, that will partner with conservatives for good policy. And good, sometimes good policy means that I don't like all of it, you don't like all of it, but for the most part, it's going to advance civic society and good things.
And hold on, David, before you answer that, because I want to tack on something to this that I want to get your thoughts on. How much of this difficulty in working with the impossibility of working with the other side, it all stems from the demonization that happens. And certainly you guys at ACU and the CPAC conference have been, I'm going to say, the victims. Not that I like playing the victim card.
Well, they had that stage, Andrew.
Yeah, well, yes, of course. No, but the point is, but right, David, you guys have been demonized in the way that all conservatives have been demonized, and it leads to these ridiculous accusations, right? It makes it much more difficult for us to have a rational discussion. And Jerry and I've talked about the conversation. The more that an organization gets not just demonized, but demonized with completely outlandish accusations.
Yeah, and
not that you need to talk about what happened last year. Don't.
No, but that's just. I think the problem behind that is that there is a feeling, particularly on the energized left, although we're guilty of it sometimes too, that the ends justify the means, that you can work to tear down somebody because they simply disagree with you. You see it with Joe Rogan, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who's no conservative, but all of a sudden he's become the heartthrob of conservatives, right?
I know. David, I want to interrupt you just for 1 second, and you keep on going. But that's also a problem that we have on the right. A celebrity or someone who is not usually with us is with us on something, and then all of a sudden we praise them, and then they come out and they kill us later. So we have to be very careful. I mean, I support Joe Rogan, his podcast, but I'm not gonna get my Joe Rogan sign and start marching around the block.
So Jerry and I are hold on, David. Jerry and I are of two very different minds on this, because I think that when somebody on the other side says something that is correct, we have to praise them for it.
I don't know. I think we praise them too much. I'm sorry, David.
Sorry, David. Go ahead.
Yeah, I am not going to go burn my Kanye West records.
There you go. I'm the same thing with my Joni Mitchell records.
How old are you, Ira?
David, on a side note, because this is the thing with Andrew and I, one of my most favorite times at a concert was when Joni Mitchell came on, and the audience, who had no idea who she was, started throwing water balloons at her. So anyway, that's what I think of Joni Mitchell.
I'm sure that would have that had the appropriate response to Joni.
Anyway, I'm sorry, David. I interrupted David though.
Go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Look, when you feel truly virtuous, whether it's accurate or not, you feel like the ends justify the means.
Yes.
So that makes it okay for Joe Biden to go out and call Georgia's election law Jim Crow too.
Yes.
That this is just the type of stuff that we didn't see before, and now I will go after our friends in the progressive left. They really have abandoned all social norms of cooperation, respect, just basic decency, because they feel so strongly that their position is right that it doesn't matter who you hurt, what you say, or how you act, as long as you get to that ultimate goal that they believe is 100%.
Because politics today for the left is religion.
Yes,
and,
100%.
And you can justify burning someone at the stake if they are a heretic, if they're an apostate. And that's the problem. And then they objectify and dehumanize right? And then we get into the circumstance where you can cancel people.
Oh, and it's no coincidence that CPAC last year was called America on Cancel.
Yes, that's right.
This year, CPAC, by the way, is called America Awake, Not Woke.
Awesome.
I'm going to pull that up, and here, let me go ahead and
man, someone over at CPAC has a head for knowing things with these titles and names. I like it.
So this is it from CPAC Florida. Coming up, I just want to say, if I'm going to date myself, what we're talking about here in this position of being
Andrew,
correct,
the Pope thinks that's a sin, my friend.
Thank you. Sorry,
he just got it.
No, I not that I just get it. It's just it reminded me of something that anyway. But my point is that I'm gonna it was something that Gilbert and Sullivan warned about in the Mikado, this idea. But let's talk about this. CPAC
back in the 19th century when Andrew Langer was traveling.
Yes, let me tell you something. This is how I can talk about Joni Mitchell.
Lord have mercy.
Did you watch it on your Palm Pilot? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, no. I watched it on my Nintendo Game Boy. I have that ability. So CPAC is coming up February 24th to 27th. I'm sorry, you said what is the theme this year?
It is Awake, Not Woke.
Awake, Not Woke. How is it? I mean, so I was down there for the beginning of it last year. I'm still figuring out if I can go down this year, working on that now.
But between Andrew and I, we've been to
every CPAC.
I mean, dozens, and I mean, going back, not every CPAC. I mean, I think my first CPAC was, and I think my first CPAC was 1986.
Wow.
Yeah. Mine was there. Well, you went there with your wife, Jerry.
We were at the time we were juniors at no, I'm sorry, it wasn't 86. It was 87, and we were freshmen at Fordham University, and we, a student organization paid for our trip down there, and CPAC had arranged for housing for us. It was we were kids, and I remember too because we were dating. And my girlfriend at the time is now my wife, but I remember where we stayed. Because I was a gentleman, I insisted that Eric and I not be in the same room, and so also my mother knew that we went down there together, so I wanted to make sure everything wasn't on the up and up. But anyway, but we've been going to, part of CPAC since the late 80s.
And for me, it's since the 90s, and it's I've had some extraordinary experiences. So how has it been holding it in Florida? Is it ever going to come back to Maryland, or are you going to continue to do it outside of the DC area?
The answer to that is yes to both questions.
Okay.
So
yes.
We made the decision to move to Florida this year, quite frankly, because our experience with the area around DC is that public officials are on a hair trigger looking for any excuse, not only to kind of shut us down, but looking for any excuse to exert more control using the virus as the reason to do so.
Yep, of course.
And the last thing we wanted to do was ask our activists, and CPAC has grown to, we get between 12 and 18,000 folks at CPAC.
I wanted to go there, yeah.
We're not going to ask our activists to, mask up if they don't feel like it. It goes back to personal responsibility, particularly in the era of Omicron. And the whole idea that a county official might require a vaccine passport, that whole papers, please thing, in the bad German Hohenzollern's accent, it's not what we were going to subject our folks to. And so, we're of the opinion that we're going to take our business to where we're appreciated. That said, I think that there is always going to be a place for a CPAC in Washington, D.C. We will likely be back here next year, if only because this is where so many people that we all recognize work.
Yeah. And
it's not to say that there aren't important people out in the field. Most of them are beyond the Beltway, but we do think that it's important to make sure that the folks at the loony bin down the street in the Capitol are aware of our presence and our activists. I say yes to your question broadly, Andrew, because our leadership under Chairman Matt Schlapp has said, you know what, we can have our cake and eat it too.
Sure.
So we are now moving forward on plans to have more than one CPAC every year.
That's
We're
great.
going to probably do one that is anchored here and then rotate around the country in red states. So we've got Orlando. We're doing CPAC Dallas in August. So if you ever want to go to Dallas and enjoy the beautiful weather, August is the time to be there. And, you know, I expect that we're going to be in places like Tennessee as well. And we're not talking small ones. We're talking major events.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we're getting the message out to as many people as possible, not just through an app or online, but so that people can really come out and you know, I do think that the value of CPAC, there's one value that a lot of folks don't talk about, and that is in this cancel culture where we're all afraid of what other people are going to think of us if we come out of the closet as conservatives, that there's really not just value, but there's an uplifting factor of going to a place and seeing all of these people that may share your values.
Yes, 100%.
Conservatives are not alone.
It's you know, it's funny because I talk about this and I sort of borrow phrases again, going back to the 19th century, from Dickens, I think it is. You know,
my goodness.
The you know, it's the spirit of CPAC stays with you the entire year, and the spirit is not just in the speakers, and I wax quite a bit about this.
Oh my goodness.
The spirit is not about necessarily about the speakers in the big room. It's not even necessarily about the speakers that you might hear in the breakout sessions, but it's in the conversations that you have with people all throughout the CPAC venue. You know, sitting around, you know, seeing an old friend or meeting somebody somewhere and having a chat with them about what they're up to.
There's something very special about the fellowship.
Yes,
I mean,
to
use a
word,
church,
Jerry, thank you.
Use a church term. I mean, and you're right, David. It's it recharges you. You know what I mean? It
100%.
recharges you to go out and get your job done.
You know, when you were struggling long before COVID, there was and I'm going to say this, there was the thing that we would call the CPAC crud, which is, you know, you're with everybody and you get some kind of sickness. But you know, you're battling that with the energy that you feel when you come out of it. I'm going to share a CPAC memory. And actually, David, I'm going to ask you for your favorite CPAC memory as I talk about mine. Jerry knows what my favorite CPAC memory is. And no, it's not Jerry and former ACU employee Michi Eliazi shouting at me on
it's
the
Andrew
escalators.
Langer. Look, it's Andrew Langer.
Putting attention to me. My favorite CPAC memory is from the 2016 CPAC. Sitting with Jerry Rogers and Jonathan Dune at their broadcast of the RNC presidential debate. And it was awesome because this was before President Trump was sort of embraced by everybody. And so you had the Trump faction, you had the Ted Cruz faction, you had other folks in there. And the great thing about it was, as the debate was up on the big screen in the big ballroom, ACU was also live streaming the tweets.
Yes,
that people were.
That's
were
right.
And it was, you know, you talk about fellowship, Jerry.
It was fun.
And it really was about, I mean, obviously there were arguments.
There were some strongly worded exchange of ideas. I remember.
Yes, some strongly worded exchanges of ideas that almost were taken so that those exchanges might have been held outside of the venue. Thankfully, they were not. David, do you have a favorite CPAC memory?
I do. So for those of you that don't know, not only am I involved in criminal justice reform because I think it's the right thing, but because I have a little bit of background in history. Yes. I got caught up in a political scandal once upon a time, and I ended up spending 10 and a half lovely months in a lovely gated community courtesy of Uncle Sam. And, you know, even though I fought my way through it, and I know what I did and I know what I didn't do, I know what I was charged with was inaccurate, to say the least, and I continue to profess my innocence. But that's neither here nor there. But I had, at the time, a criminal conviction on my record, and President Trump was kind enough to grant me a pardon. So at CPAC in Orlando last year, the president showed up, and I asked to go thank him, right? Because he really did something extraordinary. It's too bad that pardons are extraordinary, but they are extraordinary. So the boss says, yeah, I'd like you to go back and meet the president. There'll be a couple other VIPs there to to meet him at the back gate of the resort and escort him in. So we go in and we're in the back, not a plush area, just kind of a loading dock, and there are 5 or 6 of us standing there to greet him. And the Secret Service is very cautious. They are always keeping the distance, especially during COVID. And the president is germ aware. Let's just put it that way. And he's not a warm and fuzzy guy in this regard. So he comes in and my boss is introducing different people, and the woman standing next to me, she's just raving. She says, "Mr. President, I'm so happy that you're here. I love you. I support everything you do. I just want to give you a big hug." And when she mentioned the word hug, the president steps back and the Secret Service guys come up, right? There's going to be no hugging involved. Fine. So the president moves down the line, and Matt Schlapp says, "Mr. President, this is our general counsel, David Safavian. You may recall you gave him a pardon." And Trump looks at me and he says, "This is the guy that should be giving me a hug." Broke out laughing.
That's great.
That's
great.
awesome. That is awesome. Jerry, I could see David, I was going to ask you if it was the many appearances you had on my Saturday show at 7 a.m. on a Saturday.
Oh my goodness.
But that is clearly a better memory. Jerry, for you?
Well, look, I'm not going to give one because there have been so many. I mean, being on Radio Row with you, Andrew, and grabbing guests, and Andrew, we're doing radio, we're doing live radio, and Andrew's just kind of crowd watching and talking. Oh, there's so and so, and there's Governor so and so. Oh, look, there's Sean Hannity. Sean, come on over and panel with us. And so there's all that kind of fun stuff. But I'll say this stuff because I remember going as a kid back in the late 80s with Erica, and the feeling I had that I wasn't alone.
Yeah.
I think that, but every year, and I'm now, it's all these years later. I'm in my 50s now, and it's so exciting when you pull in, you park your car, and you walk in.
Yeah.
Even before it starts, because right away, you know that you're again, the kind of that fellowship thing. And so it's that feeling, and it's the same every year for an 18-year-old kid or a 50-year-old man, that sense of belonging, that sense that you're not alone, that you have your gang, that you have, there's a scene from that movie, Devil's Own, when Brad Pitt's character goes into the Irish American gun runner. And the gun runner wants to, is stealing his money. And he says, "Oh, Mr. Bark, you're a stupid, stupid man. Because you see me. What you don't see are the 1,000 men behind me." And that's how you feel when you walk into CPAC. The thousands behind you. And it's a good feeling. So again, that's my favorite feeling of CPAC.
David.
Well, look, one of the problems with social media is that we all kind of segregate into our own tribes, and we start drinking our own bathwater.
Very
right?
important here.
But I will say that when you go to CPAC, you feel like you're back with your own tribe.
That's right. Yeah. David, before we let you go, and listen, we do need to get Matt on to talk about his new book. How do folks find out more about ACU, about CPAC, and the good work that you're up to?
So if you want to find out more about ACU, you want to see our ratings, you want to see all of the work we're doing, we do have a online TV show called CPAC Now 3 times a week. Go to conservative.org. If you want to see what we're doing on criminal justice, how we're making people safer, but how we're also uniting families, helping the incarcerated women, dealing with juvenile justice in a way that doesn't tear children away from their parents, that you can go to conservativejusticereform.org. And you'll see everything that we do.
We will check that out. I'll put the link up on the show page. Oh, because we didn't ask. So any major guests, special guests, anything particular at CPAC that folks ought to be aware of this year?
Oh, good grief. We have more people. The amount of interest in CPAC in speaking at CPAC is through the roof. The rumor is that we're going to have a very, very popular former and potentially future president coming on stage maybe over the weekend.
Looking forward to seeing Barack Obama there.
But we have elected officials, but not everything is about elected officials in politics. We have some amazing writers, some journalists, some opinion leaders, thinkers. KT McFarland talking about foreign policy is something that nobody should miss, because in this crazy time with Russia and China and Iran, we need people to explain what are all those drivers, and more importantly, what are the solutions that I think this administration forgets.
David, I'm going to interrupt you, because I will tell you, KT McFarland's speech in CPAC 2020 about the abuse of power that she faced was one of the most moving speeches that I'd ever heard at CPAC. She was fantastic. Listen, you've given us a huge amount of time in the weeks before CPAC, so we're going to let you go. But David Safavian, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thanks. God bless, buddy.
Thank you, boys.
Take care. That was fun. That was a great conversation.
No, that was great fun, and I'm so happy that David took the time, because you're right. It is a busy time for the folks at CPAC, and that was a great conversation. And again, I hope folks picked up on the unusual, albeit effective, way that ACU is looking at criminal justice reform.
Good. All right. Well, with that in mind, let us move to the bottom line.
The bottom line.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, we get down to this, Jerry, and the reality, of course, is that policy is hard. And when you're talking about crime and the balance between what we want to do in terms of combating crime and, correcting the missteps that we've made in the past, and correcting missteps that we're making in order to correct the other missteps that we're making. Right. This is a hard topic. I mean, you and I have spent hours talking about this, hours upon hours talking about this in regards to Baltimore. It's interesting what you said and what David said, which is this idea of, there are some folks who want to overcorrect and they want to just build more prisons. They want to just incarcerate everybody. But by the same token, we can't under incarcerate. We have to be smart about this. Go ahead.
Well, again, and what I like about what ACU is doing is that it's purposefully trying to work with those who disagree with them.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not going to get all squishy on you, but the fact is that that's what's missing in our public conversation, and that is that the dishonesty where you have and again, I'm gonna put fault where I think fault is mostly on the left, where the left give an example, because I'm getting tongue tied. An example. Please. So Joe Biden goes to Georgia, and he calls and suggests, and he labels, and he puts in the same conversation those who oppose him on these federal power grab voting rights bills, so-called voting right bills. And he compares them to being on one side of history. You're either with Bull Connor, you're either with the KKK, or you're with the Angels. And then he goes out in a press conference and says, read the transcript. When did I say? And just the rank dishonesty. You call someone a son of a bitch, and then you wonder why they can't or won't work with you. Yes. And this is what the left does. The left likes to call those on the right with whom they disagree. It's not about policy. It's about, you're a racist.
That's right.
You're a sexist. You're evil. And they objectify, and they dehumanize, and they cancel.
And that's exactly it. It's this issue of the othering of people. It's funny because I'm reminded of something that our old friend and mentor and boss, Fred Smith, talked about, in terms of talking about his political journey. Now, in the end, right, Fred certainly was not at home in the Republican Party. I wouldn't call him a conservative by any stretch of the imagination. He wasn't. But Fred, he used to talk about the fact that when he grew up in Louisiana.
Yep.
And he knew who the racists were. Now, again, we can sort of go through the history and the concept of the Dixiecrats, but what he knew is he did not want to be labeled a racist. He didn't want to be labeled a hater. So he became a liberal progressive Democrat. At least that's what he thought. And then he had this political journey over time as he realized that the policies of progressivism were certainly not making people more free, more prosperous.
But it also goes to show you that example goes to show you how even a brilliant man like Fred Smith, with political bias, got it wrong. Because if you think about when Fred grew up in the early 60s in Louisiana, who controlled the power structure?
Well, that's right. The Democrats did.
And we don't talk about this enough. Look, Baltimore City, a one-party town for 8 decades. Look at Philadelphia. Look at Camden. Look at New York. Look at L.A. When there's one-party control, it devolves into corruption and a groupthink. And the fact of the matter is that Jim Crow, institutional racism of the 50s and 60s and into the 70s was the result of Democrats having one-party control in a huge region of the country.
You know, it's funny because I just wrote a piece, and Jerry and I were just chatting about it a minute ago. I just wrote a piece about innovation and what are called patent trolls. And I'm not going to go into the weeds on this. But one of the bottom lines, because we're in the bottom line segment here, one of the bottom lines of that op-ed is the idea that if you want competition in ideas and you need competition in platforms, and if you are discouraging new platforms from being created because of the threat of lawsuits from sort of frivolous lawsuits from somebody else, once again, you're going to have what is essentially a monopoly come down on this. And what it comes down to, weirdly enough, Jerry, wow, I'm going to come totally full circle here. The ideals behind the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the ideas of competition in a free marketplace, they apply broadly. If you have a free marketplace of ideas, then you can have debate, discussion, compromise, etc. It gets down, but when you have a monopoly, when you have somebody controlling the discourse, when you have someone controlling the policies, then you run into massive problems. So whether it's, a monolith like Facebook or YouTube, or whether it is the Democratic power structure in Baltimore City, Maryland, monopolies on control are a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, and again, bring it back to Andrew and Jerry Save the Streets.
Yes.
What's happening can't stand.
Yeah.
The Marilyn Mosby's state's attorney in Baltimore, the Manhattan district attorney up in New York and in Philadelphia and in LA, they have to be held accountable. And the fact is that they're soft on crime. They're non-enforcement, non-prosecution policies are putting the very people they claim to want to help and support, those who are suffering from disparities and from traditional bias and discrimination. They're actually putting their families, their businesses, their lives in jeopardy.
Well, it gets down to what David said about the idea. If you ask anybody who actually lives in these communities about policing and the idea of actually taking a strong stance against crime, again, dealing with the criminal justice side of things, but taking a strong stance against crime, you're going to find that those folks want this. Jerry, let me ask you this, because, we've had this conversation offline. I think you've talked about it on your show, but you've got some serious concerns about this new mayor of New York, Eric Adams.
Well, yeah, because look, Eric Adams during the Democratic primary was talking tougher on crime. And we saw National Review, we saw the New York Post, and some other center-right venues, and on WBAL, our colleague, our friend Tori Snow, and others were saying, "Hey, this guy's going to be good." And I cautioned at the time. I'm like, "Look, Eric Adams is a progressive, but he's also smart, and he understands that the people of New York are tired of the crime." And so he's using tougher language. But then he had his first opportunity to show his true colors. And when these two officers in New York were gunned down, murdered in cold blood, he did all the right things in terms of supporting the police and that sort of thing. But he also went immediately to New York City doesn't have a gun manufacturer, that there's a problem of guns, and we have to get the feds involved in ridding these guns off the streets. And the fact of the matter is that, yeah, illegal guns, that is a serious problem, but it's a problem because we have criminality and criminals and murderers. And if we deal with the criminal, it goes to Brandon Scott. Brandon Scott in Baltimore City has a strategic violence reduction plan that never employs the word crime or criminal.
Oh yeah.
And it's not, in Wauseka, in Wisconsin, it's not the car that killed those innocent people. It was the driver behind the wheel. In New York City, it's not simply the gun that killed those officers. It's the violent criminal who used the gun.
We didn't even get into this with Dave, and we probably should have. And we've got a call from a number of our listeners and viewers to talk about this, about the role that the right to keep and bear arms plays in this, which certainly is at work in New York. It should be at work in New York, and it certainly is at work and should be at work in Baltimore. And so we need to have a frank discussion, right, of these cities in which if you have these strict laws and you make it impossible for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves, the only people who are going to have guns are those who are.
And also,
here's a funny thing. Time out for a second, because here's the thing that I keep wrapping my head around. I shouldn't make a joke about this, but I find it very odd. As hard as it is to get a handgun permit in Maryland, I am stunned that the alleged assailant in this killing of these cops, it was his mother's firearm, right, Jerry? And I'm trying to figure out if that was a legal firearm or not.
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of public information on the origin of the gun. But let me say this though, and that is, again, if illegal guns are the problem, and look, it's part of the problem. The problem is criminality and violence and this sort of thing. And correct me if I'm wrong, in Baltimore City, if you are arrested with in a crime and you have an illegal gun, it's a misdemeanor.
Yes, I believe that is true.
I mean, again, so how can you say on the one hand that it's the fault of guns, illegal guns, but then when you capture a criminal in the action of a crime with an illegal gun, and the punishment is a slap on the wrist?
That's right. And remember that the Maryland legislature could have been dealing with this, but they did not. This gets into what we were talking about how these issues are really hard, right? Because you talk about overcriminalization. Jerry and I spend a lot of time talking about overcriminalization, and overcriminalization is a problem. But the answer to overcriminalization isn't to do things like taking down the level of crime in terms of the use of an illegal firearm in the commission of a crime from a felony to a misdemeanor. That sends exactly the wrong message. Listen, Jerry, because we're running short on time, I wanted to bring this up. So Jerry hit me the other day to a movie. I've only started watching it. He said, Andrew, as you're thinking about things to watch, you ought to consider looking at, because I was talking to Jerry about this movie that my wife and I started watching called The Power of the Dog, which I got about 20 minutes into, and I'm like, what the hell am I watching? What is this? I was like, enough. My wife was the same way, weirdly enough, Jerry, with Uncut Gems. Have you seen that?
You know what? I started to watch it and I had to stop because it was like I was traveling in traffic.
Yeah, I got a little bit further along, and I was like, anyway, I don't want to give anything away.
Look, I wanted to like that movie because I like Adam Sandler a lot, and I started to watch it, and then I was like, it was one of those things where there was a lot of moving around, and
you said, what the hell is this that I'm watching?
And I said, yeah, what is this? And then also, it made me feel awkward.
Yeah,
like there was a lot of awkwardness. It was like watching Curb Your Enthusiasm, but not funny.
Yes, and which is why my wife can't watch that. So Jerry said, you need to check out this movie, The Tender Bar. It's my favorite book. I'll let you pull that up in a second.
It is. It is my favorite book. It is outside of the Holy Scripture. This is the greatest book. And if you notice, this thing is tattered, and there are notes, and I reread it every single year. If you want to understand the importance of men, raising sturdy men, and the importance of place, the importance of a conversation. Remember this, right? And Andrew, I'll let you talk about the movie, but remember this.
I haven't finished watching it yet.
When the Puritans came to America, they didn't build a church first. They built a pub first.
Yes, that's right.
And the reason for that is because of the conversation.
Yes.
It's so important to have these conversations. Again, my radio show, and Andrew, when I talk to you, is based upon the importance of the importance of place and the importance of conversation.
And maybe we should switch up the expert advice segment, and we should call it the conversation, as I'm continuing to produce while we're on the air. But
I highly recommend to our listeners, read The Tender Bar.
Yes.
The movie is good,
yes.
But it's a facsimile. It's
a movie, right? Books are always better than the movies.
Yeah. But this is, I mean, the book is layered and complex, and it's just wonderful. The movie's good too.
The movie directed by George Clooney, starring Ben Affleck and a guy named Ty Sheridan, who plays the older son on this. Jerry's right. He's like, because I noticed that one of my favorite actors, Max Martini, is in it.
Yeah.
And Max Martini, Jerry's like, he's not a good guy.
He plays
a good guy in this movie.
He plays the voice.
He plays the voice, which is the kid's sort of, not estranged is not the right word, absentee father.
Yeah. And the thing is too, is remember this, that the book is a memoir. It's a true story.
It is.
And so the voice was actually a DJ in New York City.
Yeah. Do we know who it was?
I looked it up once. I could do it again.
I'll look it up later.
But you can look it up. And also the bar Dickens it was open as Dickens. It closed and reopened as Publicans. It's still there today.
Yeah. And
it closed and opened up again. It's still there.
And Jerry and I have been talking about a field trip, but my point is this also, right? Because, one of the other conversations that we need to have, and maybe we should do Andrew and Jerry Save Education, is the idea that there are many paths that are there. And that's why Ben Affleck's character in this as the Uncle Charlie, Uncle
Charlie. That's exactly right. Uncle Charlie
is a vital character because he does not have a formal education, but he is certainly well educated, and is such an important influence on the main character in the movie. Anyway, so that's Jerry's recommendation. Certainly my recommendation. It's now available on Amazon Prime. Came out last year. Not a lot of fanfare. But very enjoyable. I will tell you something else, Jerry, real quick. I watched over the weekend, because we were sort of between everything. The new episode of Billions wasn't out. The new episode of 1883 hadn't come out yet. We watched the latest book of Boba Fett. I've been meaning to watch this for a while. We watched Amazing Grace, which was a movie that came out 4 years ago. It's the concert film of Aretha Franklin. She did a concert film and an album at a church in Los Angeles in the early 1970s. And it's a long and involved story as to why they could never put the movie out. Absolutely brilliant to watch. And my wife had a moment, you pull things out. There was a guy in the church choir, because it's a gospel album.
Yeah.
And my wife says, I think that guy was in the Blues Brothers. Like, well, no, this was Los Angeles. Blues Brothers was filmed in and around Chicago. No, sure enough.
The scene with Aretha is in Los Angeles, isn't it? Is that
no? The scene with Aretha Franklin in the Blues Brothers takes place supposedly in a diner in Chicago, but she was talking about the church scene. The Slippery Rock Church. I'm sorry. Do you have somebody in the room with you? Do you need to?
No, I just no. It's just...
Anyway, so the choir that they use in the scene where James Brown is the Reverend.
Yep.
That is the same choir that was from Los Angeles that was used in the Aretha Franklin album. And so it is in fact the same guy 7 years later, which is wild. So listen, so we're going to do this live show. We're hopefully going to do it next week. We're going to do something in prime time. And we just want to give it a little advance warning. Jerry and I want to do some planning on this. That's why we're not doing it this week. there was, and I want to come back to this. So thank you all. We are starting to see more subscriptions. We're starting to see more reviews. We're starting to see more downloads. Please tell your friends, tell your family members, leave those reviews, especially on Spotify, because we're on Spotify like Joe Rogan is, on Apple Podcasts. But you know, get the word out there that you want to, that people ought to be listening to this. Jerry, what do you have to say for yourself?
Nothing. It was a good program. You know, I'm even though we've gone over an hour, I always feel there's more to say, but that's why you have to tune in for the next show. You know, again, my thing is find the truth, plant your feet, stand firm.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun and stay safe.